My name is Joyce. I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Mary, for allowing me to take part in this convention. And I'd like to thank Lisa, my co-chair, Connie Mack, thank you, Gina, my co-chair, Lisa, who also worked on the committee, and Joanne. Am I nervous or what? I thank all the moderators, all the speakers, and, they say if you say no, you can't grow. And I have to say there are quite a few extra people that grew this weekend because at a drop of a pin or last minute, they said yes to moderate. I called someone 1 o'clock this morning and asked her if she would manage to speak this afternoon, actually in the morning. 45 minutes before another meeting, I found out someone else wasn't showing up, and I asked someone. And it was just so great how everyone just said yes, and they did an excellent job. And I'd like to, maybe we can give all the speakers and moderators a big hand. I also like to thank our keynote, Mary Fran, who will speak tomorrow, and Bob S. from Texas, who is our keynote speaker for tonight. Will you welcome Bob S., please?
I would like to start in adding my thanks to all the people who've worked so hard to make this thing happen. I know these things don't just happen. A lot of people do a lot of hard work. My thanks, and I say, let's hear it for the committees, huh? I want to thank Joyce, who's taken such good care of me, picked me up at the airport, and supplied me with goodies. I want to thank all of you who arranged for me to have such a great room, and this is a beautiful place, and I'm tickled to death to be here. My name is Bob S., and I'm an enthusiastic member of Al-Anon. I think I got here like most Al-Anons. I love an alcoholic. My wife is a recovering alcoholic and had 19 years of sobriety, and believe me, folks, for that I am truly grateful. And I know some of you understand that. I think that there's 4 things that I must do to be an Al-Anon. I don't think you're automatically an Al-Anon unless you do some work yourself. I think I need to live by the steps. I think I need to abide by the traditions. I think I need to attend meetings regularly. And I think I need to have a sponsor. And I do those things. When I first came into the program, I looked around, and the only guy that was in the program in my area was about the age of my son, and I didn't think we had too much going. So I picked a lady who was even older than I. And I know we're not supposed to have sponsors of the opposite sex, but you can tell by looking at me that this sex thing is not nearly as big a problem as it was. Now, don't misunderstand me. I love to see you beautiful ladies. I just can't remember why. I would like to say that I joyfully entered service, but that's not the way it happened. My sponsor goaded me into it. I've been the GR, I've been the DR. I served 3 years with the West Texas Assembly, and a few years ago I got a call from our central office asking me if I would consider myself to be a candidate for trustee at large for all of Al-Anon. And I prayed about it, and I seemed to have the educational qualifications for which they searched. And so I said, yes, I'd be tickled to death to be considered as a candidate for trustee for at large for all of Al-Anon. And guess what, folks? I didn't get it. Oh, boy, don't we hate rejection. But what I want to tell you is that my program came to my rescue like it always was. And my program said to me, hey, whoever got that job is going to do a much better job than you. infinitely better capable and required, whatever it takes. And maybe our Heavenly Father has something else for me to do, and I'm totally free. And that's the way the program works for me. When I let it. Most of the time. Although I've only been a member of Al-Anon 20 years, I'm somewhat of an anachronism. I'm the only person still living that was present when the two co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous met for the very first time. Yeah. At the home of Henrietta Seiberling, Mother's Day, Akron, Ohio, 1935. My dad's Dr. Bob and my mom is Ann, and I rode out with my parents to meet with Bill for that very first time. My dad had come home the night before Mother's Day with a potted plant, set it down. He was potted. Went upstairs and passed out, and Henrietta Seiberling was a friend of my mom's, and she said, Ann, bring Bob out here. There's a man thinks he can help him. Bring him right on out. My mom had to tell Henrietta that Bob was in no shape to talk to anybody. But being good Al-Anon material, she said, I'll get him out there tomorrow. Well, he had one of the finest hangovers he said he ever had in his life. And as we rode along, he said, 15 minutes of this bird is all I want. But folks, it wasn't 15 minutes. He and Bill went off in a room by themselves, and they talked many hours. And as a result of that meeting, and at my mom's invitation, Bill came and he lived at our house all that summer. And that's the time and place that AA was started. Now, I think it's a miracle. My mom didn't say, Bill, why don't you come over and have lunch with us? She said, come live with us. Well, that's a miracle. And I'll tell you another miracle. Bill lived in New York City, and we lived in Akron, Ohio, and Bill said, okay. So it was in the middle of the last Great Depression, and we lived in a one-industry town, Akron, Ohio. And times were terrible there. The rubber shops were down to 2 days a week. There were strong men on the street corner selling apples for 5 cents apiece, and it was just an awful time. But again, I think it was providentially arranged because people had a lot more time for each other than perhaps we do today. They were not as harried and hurried, and I think this was absolutely essential to get these programs off the ground. Now, my mom wrote to our beloved Al-Anon co-founder, Lois, and Lois came out and stayed as long as she could. But Lois had to get back to New York. You understand, Lois is the only one that had a job. But it started a friendship that we had until Lois died in recent years. I want to talk to you about recovery. I think that that's the thing that I like to hear. Recovery. What worked, what didn't work. I think if I've been in one of these meetings and the speaker is 40 minutes into his talk and still stealing hubcaps, that we're in for a long, dry session. So how did they do it? Okay, my mom and dad in Akron, Ohio, and Bill in New York had belonged to an organization called the Oxford Group. Now, the Oxford Group was started by a Lutheran minister from Pennsylvania by the name of Frank Buckman. And the basic tenets of that organization were back to first century spirituality. And they had 4 absolutes, which have been incorporated into our programs: absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute purity of thought, and absolute love. Those things are woven into our programs. I used to go to some of those meetings with my mom and dad, and I've often thought why. It would probably to get out of the doghouse. Now, you can't tell by looking at me, but I was not a constant source of joy to my parents. And these people were so zealous. They scared me. You know, they were in your face. Are you maximum today? And I was thinking, gee, I'm barely minimum. But anyway, we owe those people a tremendous debt of gratitude because they gave us some tools that we can use in our programs. I'd like to tell you about my dad. Dad was a graduate of Dartmouth, one of your fine colleges back here in the East. And at that time, it was kind of the drinker's college. I think it's probably changed a lot now. But and he worked in industry for a couple of years, and then he prevailed upon his dad, who was a probate judge in St. Johnsbury, to send him back to medical school out in Chicago. And he barely managed to get through medical school because his alcoholism was progressive. But he obtained a coveted internship there at City Hospital in Akron. They had some advanced equipment there. And he moved to Akron, and he married my mom after a whirlwind courtship of only 17 years. Dr. Bob thought things over very carefully. He was a tall, thin Vermonter with that icy blue eyes that could just look right through you. A quiet man, just had very few things to say, but very meaningful. Always his moods went along kind of on an even keel. Gorgeous sense of humor. When I brought my bride-to-be home for the folks to look over in the 1940s, my wife is tall and thin, and he got me aside and said, "She's built for speed and light housekeeping." And I want to tell you, I hope I won't offend somebody, about the sex and hygiene lecture he gave me when I was a teenager. He got me in the bathroom one day, and I thought, I'm going to find out all about it now. Closed the door and sat down, and he said to me, "Flies spread disease. Keep yours buttoned." I want to tell you a little bit about Bill, too. You know, Bill was also a tall, thin Vermonter. From East Dorset, they were born within 100 miles of each other. Absolute total opposite. My dad was quiet and went along on an even keel. Bill was a visionary. I think Bill Wilson could see further up the road than any human I've ever known. Bill was a salesman. Bill loved to talk. Bill loved people. Bill was garrulous. Bill's mood swung. He was either high as a Georgia pine or low as a snake, you know. But these two guys fit together perfectly. They'd never had an argument. And again, I think that was providentially arranged because, you know, folks, if any two of us are exactly alike, one of us is unnecessary. And I've heard it said, if Alcoholics Anonymous had been left up to Dr. Bob, it would still be in Ohio. And if Alcoholics Anonymous had been left up to Bill, he'd have sold it to a franchise. I want to talk to you about somebody that nobody knows anything about, and that's my mom. My mom was a graduate of Wellesley, one of the fine colleges back here in the East. She went there on a scholarship. She was no dummy. Her great uncle was the president of Santa Fe Railroad, and he took a liking to her as a young lady. And in those days, the president had his own private railroad car, and they went wherever railroad cars went. And he would take her along, and so she got to see the genteel side of life. And Mom was a school teacher, had led a very sheltered, protected life, and was very easily shocked until AA. You see, we began taking these people into our home. Hospital beds were very expensive then. Double was $16 a day. I think they're up a little now. But yeah, but nobody had the $16, so they would bring the alcoholic home. My dad, being the only medical man associated with the movement, would take the guy upstairs and say, "And I'm going to give you a little dose of medicine, and I'll give you a shot of whiskey afterwards." And it was formaldehyde. And he knocked him out from 24 to 36 hours. He really gave him a jolt. And when the poor guy came to, they brought him downstairs to settle the nerves and get things functioning again. They had a standard diet. It was canned tomatoes, sauerkraut, Bill had an ulcer, and he thought sauerkraut cured everything. And K-Row syrup. I think you'll agree the early alcoholics were a hardy group. Now, my mom was the one that cleaned the messes. My mom was the one that made the beds. My mom was the one that cooked the food. My mom was the one that talked to the wives of these people on the telephone. My mom was the one that made the arrangements for the 12-step calls. And I have a letter here that I would like to excerpt for you, if I may. And I'll tell you about this letter. It was written to Bill by Henrietta D. Now, Henrietta D. is the wife of AA number 3, if you keep count. The Southern attorney, the man on the bed. Okay, on Friday, June 28, 1935, I met Ann Smith. I met Dr. Bob on Thursday evening in the hospital. On Thursday evening when I went to the hospital to see my husband. Dr. Bob was there, and he said, the little woman would like you to come over to the house. I told him I could not go that night, but would go the next night. On Friday night, when I went to the house on Ardmore Avenue, and that's the address of our home, I met the most thoughtful, understanding person I've ever known. After talking with her for a while, I addressed her as Mrs. Smith, and she said, "And to you, my dear," she wanted to remove all the barriers. And I skip a little bit. Bill was there at this time. And told me to kneel, and she told me to surrender myself to God and ask Him if He had a plan for me and to reveal it to me, and taught me to have a quiet time in the morning that I might feel near to God and receive strength for the day. She taught me to surrender my husband to God, not to try and tell him how to stay sober, as I'd done that and failed, and taught me to love everyone. She said, ask yourself what is wrong with me today if I don't love you. She said the love of God is triangular. It must flow from God, through me, through you, and back to God. She taught me not to ever criticize the remarks of the person leading meetings, as we do not know God's plan. Maybe what that person says will meet the need of someone in the group. In the early part of 1936, Ann organized a women's group for wives of alcoholics, whereby in her loving way she tried to teach us patience, love, and unselfishness. And I skip a little bit. And I'll end this up, when I met and talked with this intelligent, deeply spiritual woman, I was completely sold on AA. So you see, my mom realized from the word go that it was a disease affecting the whole family. And the early meetings were all open meetings. My mom always sat in the back of the room. She wore an old black dress. And when my dad finally got back on his feet a little bit, and she got 3 new dresses, someone said, Ann, are you going to wear a new dress to the meeting tonight? And she said, no, I'm going to wear the old black one. Somebody will come into that room that can't afford a new dress through those doors. So that's the type of lady she was. Bill wanted her to write the chapter to the Family Afterwards, and she wouldn't do it. So he wrote it himself. And Lois was pretty upset about that. And she said, Bill, why didn't you let me write it? And, you know, the alcoholics, they're pretty hard to hem up. He said, well, Lois, he said, well, I wanted to keep the continuity of the book. So he got out of that one. Have you ever stopped to think of the miracles that have happened that have allowed these programs to grow in from 2 guys who couldn't have raised $50 between them? The only thing they had going was both had open spiritual minds, and they had the desire to be of service to another human being. I think it's been God-directed all the way through. The first guy I remember was a young man by the name of Eddie, who had just been thrown out of his home for non-payment of rent with a cute little blonde wife and 2 stair-step kids. And they moved him into our house, the whole family, took Eddie upstairs and locked him in the upstairs where he'd be available as they got this knowledge. Hey, you got to remember, folks, nothing's written. They're just trying to stay a page ahead of Eddie. But Eddie was an agile young guy, and we had downspouts, and Eddie would open the second story window, slide down the downspouts, and escape. And they'd have to postpone Eddie's recovery long enough to recapture him. Can you imagine a more inauspicious start to this wonderful program? One time Eddie got as far away as Cleveland, Ohio, and called them up on the phone, to let them know that he was going to commit suicide. But that he would give them time to drive up and witness the event. Well, when they finally got Eddie back again, when he sobered up, he had some unusual characteristics. He began beating up on this little cute lady to whom he was married, and then he began chasing my mom around the kitchen with a butcher knife. So we held a group conscience meeting. And it was decided the only thing to do with Eddie was for his little wife to take him back to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and recommit him in a mental institution. And this was done, and Bill and my dad were crestfallen. Here's their first attempt to sober up another alcoholic. Total failure. But I want to tell you folks something. At my dad's funeral, 15 years later, a guy walked up to me, and he said, "Do you know me?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Yeah, I know you. You're Eddie." And he said, "That's right." And he said, "I want you to know that I'm a member of the Youngstown, Ohio AA group, and I've been sober 1 year. Yeah. So we don't know the result of that 12-step call. We're only called on to take that hand that reaches out for help, regardless of the program we're in. That's our responsibility. And thank God we don't have to be fully qualified to do that. Is there anybody here that really thinks they're fully qualified to make a 12-step call? I don't think so. But anyway, we go with what we've got. A couple little miracles I'll talk to you about. Money. You know, Bill and Dad were absolutely broke, and they thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if we had some dough, we could start a treatment center, and I'm sure my dad could see himself in a white coat and welcoming the patients, and maybe Bill out on the street flagging them in. So they went to New York to get some money from some people with very, very deep pockets. Told their story, and Mr. Rockefeller and his group listened very patiently, and they said, no, money will ruin it. And that's a miracle. Just think, imagine what would have happened if that group had dumped $1 million on 100 broke drunks. It's just horrible to even think about it. And I bet we wouldn't be sitting here tonight either. Another one, anonymity. You know, that was put in there because in the early days in both programs, there were people with huge egos. Now, I know we don't have that anymore. But you can't be Mr. A.A., Mrs. Al-Anon if nobody knows what your name is. And another thing that has happened, it doesn't matter if you've been here 40 years or 40 days, we're all exactly the same. And that's the way it ought to be. God as we understood him. That was put in there to quiet a loudmouth agnostic by the name of Jimmy B., who said, this God stuff will ruin it. It'll run them out faster than we can bring them in. So to quiet Jimmy down, they put God as we understood him. And you know what that has done? That has made these movements acceptable to people for Eastern religions. Entirely different idea of a concept of a higher power than perhaps you and me. That one phrase makes our programs acceptable to those people. Another miracle. Well, my dad only lived 15 years. He was older than Bill. But in that length of time, he personally treated without charge medically and AA-wise over 5,000 alcoholics. Yeah. And my wife and I, we attended the first international in 1950, and he was very ill. My mom had died the year before, and he was lonely, and he was very sick. And he gave a little talk, and then Betty, my wife, and I drove him back to his beloved Vermont one more time. And I wouldn't take for the time that we had caring and sharing as we drove along. And I brought him back to Akron, my wife and I. And then I had to get back to Dallas. I had a flying job at the time, and I never saw my dad alive again. But I wouldn't take for that time that was spent. I want to talk to you a little bit about my family. My wife and I were party animals. Yeah, we loved to dance and we loved to drink and we loved to go to parties and I sure wasn't telling anybody that my dad was one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. Once in a while, someone would find it out and invite us to a meeting. And we would go. And we'd have a wonderful time. And as we left to drive along together, we'd say, oh, good for them. They needed that. And all the while, alcoholism was working in our family. You got to understand, my wife had poured her dad into a drying out place in Denver in 1945. And he and another guy started Alcoholics Anonymous in New Mexico. So if there was ever two human beings that should have recognized alcoholism, it was Betty and me. But we didn't. You see, we were different. Yeah, we were different. And when it finally got bad, and we didn't quit immediately, we began to kind of touch it up a little bit and change it a little because we didn't really want the party to be over. But I think alcoholism is divided into maybe three sections, at least as far as I'm concerned. Fun and problems. And I like to compare it to, I like to tell a story about two hunters that loved to hunt up in Alaska, and they would hire a little aviation company to fly them into a little remote lake, and then they'd have their hunt, and the plane would come pick them up a week later. And so the little plane came in, and one of the hunters said, oh, I'm glad to see you. We've had a wonderful hunt. We got 4 moose. And the pilot said, 4 moose? You two guys and me in this little plane? One of the hunters said, a guy came in with a plane just like yours last year. And what he did was he taxied up the river and got a longer run for takeoff, and he went right on up. So this pilot was new with the company, and he said, I got to try it. So he did that, and sure enough, the little plane just took right on off, and they start back to civilization. Well, way out in the wilderness, the little engine is working so hard, it begins to overheat, and it loses power. And way out in the wilderness, it crashes. And one of the hunters drags his buddy out from under the plane, and his buddy said, oh, my goodness, where in the world are we? The other said, you know, I think we're within 100 yards of where we crashed last year. And that's the way our life was going. Trying the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. When it finally got so bad, as it happens, a young guy there in the little town in which we live, and we really live in the boonies, called up and said, Betty, we're starting a group here in Nocona for people that have a problem like you and me. And he said, gosh, I wonder how he knew. Well, they hadn't seen each other sober, I don't think, forever. But anyway, she went, and that's the founding day of that group, and that was her dry day, and she never had another drink. Beautiful. I want to talk to you a little bit about being raised in an alcoholic family, because I know there's a bunch of you young people there. How many here were raised in a family with active alcoholism? Oh, wow, look at us. Well, I spent the first 17 years of my life raised in a home with active alcoholism, and I understand some of that. we develop a way to cope. I was a runner. I got out of that place as fast as I could and stayed as long as I thought I decently could without getting in serious trouble with my folks. I resented the poverty. We were so broke, I used to think, if I could just have enough money to buy a milkshake with the other kids, but it wasn't. And I pass this on to you, that I have to be very careful. I think that I must watch out and not be a victim. You know, this country loves victims. They love to be victims. And it's so easy to do if you're raised in that environment, saying, hey, it's not my fault. All the screw-ups you do, all the things you weren't supposed to do, all the things you omitted, all the things you commented, it's not my fault. I'm a victim. And that works. That works beautifully. But to keep that victim mindset alive, there's one thing I must do. And that is I must have increasing resentments towards somebody or some people. That's what feeds that mindset. And we all know in our program there's one thing that will destroy us. It's resentments. So we're not victims. We're survivors. I think we get here to adulthood with some scratches, but thank God our program teaches us how to be not victims, but survivors. My wife went to Al-Anon for a month or two, AA for a month or two, and I was kind of watching her. And I could see the change in her. And I could see that really she was running off and leaving me. And I wasn't liking it. I really wasn't ready for the party to be over. But I was watching her, and I could see the change in her. And I could see that she was just going off and leaving me. And so I talked to some friends, and somebody said, well, why don't you go to Al-Anon? I thought, well, why not? I don't mind joining the auxiliary. So I got in my car and I drove 40 miles over to Gainesville, Texas, and I show up at my first Al-Anon meeting. And I walk in that room full of women. I'm the only guy. I immediately got mixed emotions about Al-Anon. And I like to describe mixed emotions this way. It's kind of like the feeling you have when your teenage daughter comes in at 4 a.m. with a Gideon Bible under her arm. But I stayed. And those gals patiently listened to me. You know, my wonderful story. After all, I was the rock that was keeping that family together, you know. Bloody but unbound. No, I really laid a trip on those gals. And left feeling noble. And I talked to one of the ladies. You know, these things are revealed to us as we can handle them. I talked to one of the ladies a couple of years later. Said, oh, yeah, I remember that, Bob. Said, after you left, we held a meeting. And we said, there's one that isn't going to make it. But I do think, at least in the small groups of which I attend, that we need to listen to that story once. Just once. Then let's get on to recovery. Our recovery wasn't easy. We had a lot of resentments, both of us. She began taking her place again in a routine of life, and I resented it. She started buying the groceries. And I got all upset and bent out of shape over that, and I hate to buy groceries. But she was doing it, so we had a lot of things to work out. Sometimes we had to get in the car and just drive away. from each other. Sometimes we just had to have that space. I had to learn that sometimes our relationship is 90-10, sometimes it's 10-90. And what's the difference? It'll all balance out. First I thought it had to be 50-50. But the program teaches me no. Sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's that way. Sometimes Betty would get on a dry drunk. Sometimes Bob would get on a dry. And if it happened at the same time, there was hell among the yearlings. Long periods of silence, Ask your father to pass the salt. Yeah. But I had to learn to absolutely peel away the past, and the past drives hard. I had to learn that I was still fully capable of all the lousy tricks. I was still capable of going back to the person that I was, that I could lose everything I had gained if I didn't continue to work at the program. And one of the most profound statements I've ever heard anybody in a program make was a woman from Albuquerque in AA, and she said, "The person I was will drink again." And I thought, wow. How true that is of the AA, and how true it is of us Al-Anons. The person I was will get sick again. I know how to do it. I did it for years. So I have to continually work to keep my program fresh and green. I have to continually do these things. And things got a lot better for us. We live in a very little country town, and our finances began looking better. And well, we recently had put carpeting in our bathroom. And you know how good that feels on a cold winter night on your feet. And we like it so well, we're thinking about running it on into the house. Anyway, I don't drink anymore. I quit shortly after Betty joined AA. And I do that because I want us to both be on the same page. I want us to go down with our programs together. We're not the same, but they're parallel. And I want her to enjoy her sobriety to the fullest amount. So I just don't drink anymore. Everything was going along pretty great for us. All the kids were out of school. One had a bachelor's, two had master's degrees, and one had his doctorate. And all those that were married that wanted to be married, and all were divorced that wanted to be divorced. We have 4 kids. And our program was going good, and we were just enjoying life. And a year ago, last Thanksgiving, I got a call and said, Todd, my oldest son, beautiful guy with a master's degree cum laude from the University of Texas, was a top BMW salesman in Dallas, had a beautiful wife, beautiful home, no money problems, no problems with drug and booze. Went to work one day and something happened at work. Went out in his car and pulled out his gun and blew his brains out. There's no parent that wants to outlive their kids. What a terrible shock. And again, I think the program took us and held us in their arms until we were able to stand again. One of the benefits. Shortly after that, my wife Betty came down with lung cancer. And she died last June. And again, the program sustained me. The people in it, in both programs, sustained me to where I could stand up by myself finally. Where I could finally stand up again. And that's what the programs will do for you in adversity. I think that I tell you this not to ask sympathy, but I tell you this because I think if you live long enough, you're going to have to face some of these issues. It's just part of life. And believe you me, if you've got your program, either program, they will sustain you and see you through this, and you can show the world again how you're handling this type of a situation, that you're up and you're at them and you're doing the very best you can, and hiding your head under the pillow is not an option. Right? So that's what the program can do. The freedom that I have. You know, I think in our programs, for me, there's 3 degrees of freedom. Do you all ever remember that song, Me and Bobby McGee? Yeah, okay. And that's how we are when we get here. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing ain't worth nothing, but it's free. That's kind of how we are. Then after we've been in the program a while, we stand at the turning point. To me, that was, hey, am I going to work this program or am I not? Am I going to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand it, or am I not? That's a turning point. When I do that, I get a degree of freedom. A degree of freedom. Then I have a spiritual sponsor who lives in Florida, and he said, Bob, there's another layer. He said, what I do is, he said, I appoint God every morning my in-house manager. And I say, okay, you're running it. I'll do the legwork. And God will be traveling with me. The God, I understand him. And that's the one, you know, that we learned to love. I was raised in the Episcopalian church. You know, you don't get taken to church, you get sent. And the Episcopalian church is Catholic light. You know, all the pageantry without the guilt. Yeah. I was a bomber pilot in Africa in World War II, and our losses were over 50%. And I had a different relationship with God. My relationship with God at that time was a 911 relationship. And I think you can understand that. Just strictly emergencies. And then I came to know the God that sustains me today, that rides with me today. As we get down the road, I said, God, do you see that SOB just cut us off on purpose? But these are the things that the program gives. I come back because you're teaching me more about myself. I come back because you have taught me how to get rid of that squirrel cage thinking that used to just go round and round and round in my mind and no solutions. I come back because when I can talk to any one of you here and any place I go that's in the program, and we can share together, and I can talk to you and show me just what I am, warts and all, and you do the same for me. We have an instant, intimate relationship, and I know of no other program that can do that. Anywhere in the world we go, we can have that relationship. Beautiful. I notice that there are a lot of you here for your first convention, and I promise you'll never forget it. They are just absolutely great. I think maybe there might be some of you here who are discouraged, who are having a tough time, who think that you may have fallen too low. You think that you're broke. Well, remember, these programs started broke. You think that it works for some of these other people, all these other people here, but it won't work for you. I'd like to say to you, please, stay around. Talk to us. We can tell you about miracles. We are miracles. And if you need one in your life, if you need one in your life, I can promise you, if you will come back and do the very best you can with these programs, you've still got your miracle coming. And I say to you, please don't quit before your miracle. Thank you very much. I love you all.